On August 19, 1942, in the thick undergrowth close to Tivu Point on Guadalcanal, 2nd Lieutenant Genjiro Imi from the 8th Independent Anti-Tank Gun Company jotted down his impressions in a diary entry that vividly reflected the dismay gripping numerous Japanese troops upon their initial clash with U.S. forces. Pushing through the heavy veil of palm fronds and choking creepers, Imi joined 9 or 16 fellow members of Colonel Kona Ichiki's unit who had recently disembarked from destroyers after a covert night landing, an operation Japanese leaders viewed as the opening move in reclaiming Henderson Field. Intelligence had painted the enemy as a force of maybe 2,000 troops, inadequately prepared, prone to panic, and weakened by indulgent upbringings. Colonel Ichiki had brushed aside cautions about delaying for backup. "These are Americans," he assured his subordinates. "We'll drive them into the ocean by daybreak." Unbeknownst to these seasoned fighters from campaigns in China and Southeast Asia, they were on the verge of facing an event utterly novel in the records of the Imperial Japanese Army. Far beyond mere loss, which was inconceivable for warriors unbroken by defeat since 1937, this would entail a thorough dismantling of core battlefield principles, operational doctrines, and foundational beliefs that shaped Japan's military approach. The terrain would turn into an asset for the Americans. The nocturnal advantage that Japanese units had dominated throughout the conflict would turn against them, while vast edges in weaponry, teamwork, and raw firepower would dismantle the legend of Japanese supremacy in hand-to-hand fighting. This shift had started 2 weeks prior, on August 7th, when 11,000 Marines from the 1st Marine Division charged onto the beaches at Lunga Point. General Alexander Vandegrift's Leathernecks were carrying out Operation Watchtower, marking the inaugural U.S. assault in the Pacific Theater. The mission appeared simple in planning documents: capture the largely finished Japanese airstrip, set up a protective line, and secure it until support arrived. In truth, they were entering the fiercest, most grueling contest in Marine Corps annals to date, within a setting that pushed the boundaries of human resilience. Guadalcanal formed a picture of infernal paradise, extending 90 miles in length and 25 miles across, with its core ruled by peaks climbing 8,000 feet amid endless mist. The shoreline plain hosting Henderson Field consisted of kunai grass patches, marshes, and dense woods where sightlines shrank to just a few paces. The air hung heavy with stifling warmth, moisture levels staying above 90%. Swarms of mosquitoes hung so thickly that soldiers breathed them in. Streams and waterways that seemed pristine in scout photos buzzed with pathogens and illnesses. In time, malaria, dengue fever, dysentery, and jungle sores would sideline more fighters than combat itself. Yet, that initial dawn revealed the airfield largely unguarded. The 2,200 Japanese laborers and 600 sailors scattered into the foliage, leaving behind tools, provisions, and, most vitally, the site itself. By dusk on August 8th, U.S. builders were already repairing the strip. They dubbed it Henderson Field in honor of Major Lofton Henderson, a fallen Marine pilot from Midway. Soon after, planes touched down, turning the island into the base for what posterity would call the Cactus Air Force. Japan's counterstrike came quickly and proved devastating for Allied ships. During the evening of August 9th, Vice Admiral Gunichi Mikawa commanded 7 cruisers and a destroyer in a masterful nocturnal ambush. The clash at Savo Island ranked as the U.S. Navy's gravest setback ever. In under 60 minutes, 4 heavy cruisers, USS Quincy, USS Vincennes, USS Astoria, and HMAS Canberra, plunged to the depths. Over 1,000 crewmen perished amid the inferno at sea. The remaining Allied vessels pulled back, hauling away much of the undelivered cargo. The Marines were isolated now, severed from resupply, confronting a bolstered foe with only partial gear and rations. In those opening days of August, Japanese commanders overlooked a pivotal truth. Henderson Field held the balance of power. Mastery of the runway allowed command of nearby waters in the light of day. Planes from Henderson could hit any Japanese vessel inside 200 miles. This one reality would shape the campaign's every twist. Japan might claim the hours of darkness, ferrying reinforcements and goods via speedy destroyers on voyages dubbed the Tokyo Express. But with sunrise, U.S. flyers commanded the heavens. The overall dynamics required Japan to seize back Henderson Field at once before the defenders could dig in deeper. Imperial General Headquarters handed the duty to Lieutenant General Harukichi Hyakutake's 17th Army, stationed in Rabaul. Hyakutake commanded scant resources. The 35th Infantry. The 35th Brigade, led by Major General Kiyotake Kawaguchi, remained stationed on Palau. Meanwhile, the 4th Infantry Regiment lingered in the Philippines. The nearest available force turned out to be the 28th Infantry Regiment under Colonel Ichiki, positioned close to Guam. This unit had originally been earmarked for the Midway Campaign, which got scrapped following the naval setback in June. As an instructor at the Infantry Academy, Colonel Kona Ichiki earned praise as an elite strategist. Yet he also carried a reputation for rash decisions and unshakable faith in the Japanese warrior ethos prevailing over U.S. hardware. Prior to heading out from Truk toward Guadalcanal, Ichiki got explicit instructions to hold off on recapturing the airfield until his full regiment arrived. However, he held American troops in low regard. Drawing from analyses of clashes in China, the Philippines, and other spots where Japanese units faced Western adversaries, he concluded they showed poor discipline. They crumbled when pushed. They couldn't compete with Japanese fighters in brutal melee encounters. In the darkness of August 18th, 6 destroyers ferried 9 of 17 troops from Ichiki's initial wave to Tsu Point, about 15 miles east of the U.S. defenses. The operation proceeded without a hitch, slipping past American detection. Right away, Ichiki dispatched scout teams to gauge the foe's numbers and setups. This standard move in tactics would ultimately seal his doom. On August 19th, a squad from Company A, 1st Battalion, 1st Marines, commanded by Captain Charles Brush, pushed along the shore path toward Coley Point and ran into Japanese troops. The groups clashed in a short, brutal skirmish. The Marines took out 31 enemy fighters and seized papers exposing a major hostile buildup nearby. Even more crucial, those documents indicated the Japanese had badly misjudged U.S. numbers. Captain Brush hurried back inside the lines with his vital intel haul. General Vandergrift quickly grasped the threat. An enemy push loomed, likely from the east. He directed Colonel Clifton Bledsoe Cates to bolster the barriers along the spit at the mouth of the stream the Marines dubbed the Tenaroo River, though it was really the Ilu River, a mix-up that endured in later reports. Cates placed Lieutenant Colonel Leonard Cresswell's 2nd Battalion, 1st Marines along the bank, setting up machine guns for overlapping coverage over the sandbar. The ensuing clash would rank among the most lopsided victories in Marine Corps annals. Ignoring updates from his missing scouts or incoming support, Colonel Ichiki opted for an instant strike. From the evening of August 20th through the pre-dawn hours of August 21st, he launched a head-on rush straight over the sandbar. Japanese tactics stressed the edge of inner resolve and bold nocturnal assaults to overpower rival guns. Ichiki trusted his battle-hardened men could shatter U.S. lines via bold charges and savage up-close brawls, where bayonets and explosives gave Japanese troops the upper hand. Shortly past midnight, Solomon Islands guide Jacob Vuza, who had broken free from Japanese captors after enduring prolonged abuse, staggered into Marine lines bearing an alert. The enemy was advancing. Soon after, the onslaught erupted. Scores of Japanese infantrymen surged over the sandbar, yelling war shouts, blasting rifles, and lobbing explosives. They plunged headlong into a slaughter field the Marines had rigged with careful calculation. The M1917A1 Browning water-cooled machine guns roared to life. Refined in the Great War, these arms stood as the overlooked backbone of Marine suppression. Each could pour out 600 rounds a minute non-stop, provided the cooling sleeve remained topped up. The Marines had sighted them to back one another, leaving no patch of the sandbar exposed. Japanese troops dropped in droves as the hefty .30 caliber bullets ripped through bodies. Those who crossed the spit met 37mm anti-tank pieces loaded with canister shot, massive buckshot blasts that minced soldiers into pulp. The assault dragged on for hours. One surge after another of Japanese fighters hurled themselves against the gunfire. A few reached the Marine lines and traded blows in fierce grapples. Marines battled using rifles, blades, bare hands, whatever came to hand. Still, the setup endured. The crisscrossing fire lanes blocked any enemy penetration. As light crept in, Colonel Ichiki's offensive ground to a halt. Over 800 of his soldiers sprawled lifeless or gasping on the sandbar and in the shallows. Sunrise offered no mercy to the remnants. General Vandergrift called for a riposte with parts of the 1st Battalion, 1st Marines. 5 M3 Stuart light tanks rolled over the sandbar and methodically rooted out Japanese holdouts in the palm thickets. War reporter Richard Tregaskis, observing from a Marine vantage, captured the moment. It was fast. It was mesmerizing to watch them darting through the foliage, twisting and whirling, unleashing bursts of golden fire. We hadn't appreciated just how numerous the Japanese were in that woodland. One cluster after another got driven out and mowed down by the tank's canister rounds. By noon, on August 21st, the clash at the Tenaru had concluded. Out of the 9,000 Japanese troops that had come ashore at Tau Point, around 800 lay slain. Roughly 128 who survived, mainly from auxiliary groups lingering close to the beachhead, slipped away into the underbrush. They transmitted a wireless dispatch to the 17th Army Command detailing the catastrophe. Colonel Ichiki was among the fallen, although reports vary on the circumstances of his death. The formal Japanese account stated he torched his unit's banners and performed ceremonial self-immolation. Certain observers maintained he perished at the forefront of a last desperate rush. The Marines suffered about 40 deaths and injuries. The mental toll on the remaining Japanese fighters proved crushing. Seized papers and later testimonies exposed the horror of discovering that a whole battalion had been wiped out in one evening. The Americans hadn't battled as Japanese tactics had foreseen. They showed no fear during nocturnal assaults. They held firm against howling assailants. Rather, they lay in wait at fortified spots, let the Japanese advance into lethal areas, and methodically eradicated them with focused barrages. The harshest insight emerged from inspecting seized gear and surveying the field. The Americans commanded a degree of resources that Japanese scouts had utterly overlooked. The Browning guns didn't seize up, didn't overheat past their limits, didn't malfunction due to shoddy upkeep or lack of replacements. Each Marine appeared burdened with more rounds than a full Japanese fire team. The cannon backing the Marines could summon dwarfed any Japanese array. And the synergy among foot soldiers, guns, and even shipboard barrages from vessels at sea formed a cohesive engine of annihilation unlike anything Japanese units had faced. In the wake of the Tenaru route, additional Japanese reinforcements were already en route to Guadalcanal. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto orchestrated a grand sea effort to bolster the subsequent bid to reclaim Henderson Field. 3 lumbering cargo vessels left truck on August 16th, transporting the leftover 1,400 men from Ichiki's outfit, along with 500 seagoing Marines. Following the sea skirmish of the Eastern Solomons, which crippled one of the cargoes, Japanese leaders opted to scrap lumbering haulers altogether. They shifted to using fast escorts for runs dubbed the Tokyo Express. From August 29th through September 4th, assorted escorts and slim cruisers ferried nearly 5,000 members of Major General Kawaguchi's 35th Infantry Brigade to Tau Point. The Tokyo Express excelled at shuttling personnel. Escorts could complete the loop from the Shortland Islands to Guadalcanal overnight, slashing risks from U.S. aerial strikes. Yet, the approach carried a fatal flaw. Bulky gear couldn't travel that route. Field guns, armor, vehicles, and crucially, sufficient rations and munitions got abandoned. This supply shortfall would seal the fate of every Japanese push on Guadalcanal. Troops showed up lugging merely personal loads. They relied on scavenging nearby and smuggling bits through enemy lines. As the fight dragged, Japanese ranks battled not only U.S. ordnance, but hunger too. General Kawaguchi fixed September 12th for his push on Henderson Field. His scheme envisioned a triple thrust. One contingent would hit from the west via the shoreline. Another would lunge from the south, slicing through thick woods to target what Japanese spies deemed the softest U.S. sector. Kawaguchi planned to direct the primary drive from the south, advancing via an interior crest overlooking Henderson Field. Unbeknownst to Kawaguchi, Marine scouts had pinpointed that crest as the prime path of entry. Lieutenant Colonel Merritt Edson, head of the 1st Raider Battalion, led a foray into Tasimboko village on September 8th and uncovered vast stockpile caches signaling a major Japanese buildup nearby. Edson grasped their intent right away. The enemy would surge from the south, using the crest for access. Edson sought approval to anchor defenses right on the crest. General Vandegrift consented. On September 10th and 11th, Edson arrayed about 840 Marines from his raiders and the 1st Parachute Battalion atop the crest. He chose strong points with the identical deliberate precision that had marked the defenses along the Tenaru were meticulously organized. Machine guns were set up to deliver overlapping fields of fire. Mortar teams zeroed in on probable paths of advance. Guns from the 11th Marines mapped out fire plans for protection. All possible benefits from the landscape and weapons were assessed and set in place. The ridge formed a slender coral backbone stretching about 1,000 meters, made up of 3 separate peaks, blanketed in tall kunai grass and dotted with trees. Steep gullies flanked each side, thick with vegetation and at times impossible to pass through. Such ground offered ideal cover for a nocturnal assault by sneaking foot soldiers. Yet, when guarded effectively, it turned into a deadly trap. That evening of September the 12th, Kawaguchi's troops launched their push. In contrast to Ichiki's direct rush, this operation showed greater cunning. Japanese infantrymen slipped into the gullies flanking the ridge, seeking to surround U.S. lines. Patrols tested for vulnerabilities. Once spotted, bigger groups massed to force openings. The clash turned brutal and chaotic. Amid the night, Leathernecks often faced close-quarters brawls with enemy troops who had crept up to throwing distance for grenades, though the setup for defense endured. As Japanese units bunched up for pushes, bursts from Marine mortars and cannons tore them apart. The 11th Marines unleashed over 2,000 shells in the hours of darkness, sending explosive rounds so near friendly lines that fragments injured their own. Gunners on machine guns kept shooting until the metal heated to a fiery glow under the black sky. Lone Marines battled using whatever they could grab: rifles, sidearms, blades, shovels, or nearby objects. Sergeant Major Jacob Vayer, the scout who had earlier alerted to the Tenaru threat, patrolled the front, bolstering his comrades and highlighting enemy sneak paths. Sergeant John Basilone held a vital machine gun post in the line. After his team fell killed or hurt, he fired on solo, turning back assault after assault from the Japanese. For his stand that night, he earned the Medal of Honor down the line. At Edson's Ridge, 2 Marines claimed the Medal of Honor, while 19 others took home the Navy Cross. As daybreak arrived on September 13th, the enemy push had not pierced the lines, yet Kawaguchi retained extra manpower and geared up for another try the next evening. Edson withdrew his troops to the ridge's midpoint, tightening his setup. General Vandegrift dispatched fresh support, swelling the defenders to roughly 2,500 strong. The Japanese struck once more, but now the Marines stood firm with fortified spots and denser barrages. The combat on the second night raged fiercer than before. Kawaguchi committed his leftover strength to frantic bids to shatter the holdout ahead of U.S. buildup that would seal it tight. Enemy fighters surged forward time and again, falling in droves to the hail of bullets from automatics. Certain rushes got as close as 50 yards to Edson's headquarters before halting. In a dire moment, Edson seized a rifle and stepped into the fight himself. Still, U.S. guns and prior groundwork carried the day. By morning of September 14th, Kawaguchi's drive had crumbled entirely. Losses for the Japanese proved devastating. Around 830 to 850 of their men perished on or near Edson's Ridge. For the Marines, the toll reached about 104 dead and more than 200 hurt across the Raider and parachute units. The heights, soon dubbed Bloody Ridge or Edson's Ridge for all time, stood as a testament to how well American defense tactics worked. To the Japanese who lived through it, the fight delivered yet another deep jolt to their views on battle. Diaries taken in capture and later testimonies echoed a common awakening. They had anticipated battling fellow foot soldiers in the shadows, where their drills and resolve would win out. Rather, they met barrages from cannons, automatics, and mortars, focused with an accuracy beyond their reach. U.S. leaders anticipated the foe's move. They crafted zones of death. They lay in wait for the Japanese to step in, then they obliterated them through sinked barrages. The fights at Tenaru and Bloody Ridge set the mold that echoed across the Guadalcanal effort. Japanese troops would mount rushes fueled by bravery, dark maneuvers, and skill in knife work. Americans countered with superior punch, integrated arms tactics, and barriers honed to exploit their edge. The result stayed foreseeable. Japanese deaths mounted to ruinous levels. U.S. losses, though heavy, remained bearable. Yet figures failed to convey the terror of bush combat on Guadalcanal. The jungle setting itself acted as a merciless killer. Malaria struck almost every soldier who lingered on the island for over a couple of weeks. Come December 1942, the 1st Marine Division documented more than 8,000 instances of malaria. Tropical illnesses sidelined roughly 2/3 of the unit. Dysentery affected everyone. Troops battled fungal ailments that corroded their skin. Jungle decay produced persistent ulcers that refused to mend in the sweltering moisture. Untreated dental issues resulted in swollen gums, rotting teeth, and widespread infections. The Japanese endured far graver hardships. From the outset, their logistics faltered, leaving troops with scant provisions. Field rations were meant for standard issue, yet the Tokyo Express deliveries fell short time and again. Fighters scraped by on scavenged goods, eking out whatever rice shipments arrived, which they had to ration beyond reason. Hunger turned into an unrelenting foe. Medical resources were virtually absent. Quinine stocks for warding off malaria depleted fast and weren't replenished properly. Casualties from wounds frequently succumbed to treatable infections without decent drugs. Captured Japanese records from later in the fight revealed a grim reality. A late October dispatch from a medical officer indicated that over 60% of the 17th Army's personnel on Guadalcanal were sidelined by illness or undernourishment. Operational capacity had dwindled to maybe 30% of full roster levels. Losses mounted at 50 deaths daily, mostly from famine and sickness instead of battle injuries. U.S. Supply vessels, shielded by planes from Henderson Field in the daytime, consistently brought in provisions, bullets, medicines, and fresh gear. Shortfalls did hit, especially during August and the start of September, after sea losses isolated the Marines briefly, but those gaps were fleeting. By October, resupply lines stabilized. Marines consumed tinned meals that lacked flavor but delivered sufficient energy and sustenance. Bullets flowed freely, allowing gunners to blaze away until their guns overheated and failed, at which point they could call for spares. Healthcare featured mobile clinics with operating rooms, plasma for transfusions, sulfa antibiotics against bacteria, and transport for severe injuries to base facilities. Japanese transport relied on destroyer cargoes or stealthy insertions past U.S. positions. Troops mastered stretching one rice ball across a full day. Shells were hoarded so strictly that commands limited shooting to dire necessities only. Treatment boiled down to a rap if fortune smiled, crude surgery sans painkillers if it didn't, or fatal sepsis otherwise. Grievously hurt men were handed explosives and abandoned to end their lives, sparing their comrades the load or the shame of surrender. In late October, the Japanese launched their campaign's biggest push. General Harukichi Hyakutake arrived on Guadalcanal to lead it in person. He deployed parts of the 2nd Division, featuring battle-hardened veterans from China. The strategy involved synchronized strikes from various angles, with the primary thrust pushing north from the south via thick foliage akin to the Bloody Ridge path. On this occasion, though, they fielded larger numbers, sharper teamwork, and cannon fire that destroyers had at last ferried in. The push kicked off October 23rd with an initial probe from the west. 9 Japanese tanks, uncommon on Guadalcanal due to shipping woes, spearheaded a charge over the Matanikau River. U.S. troops, bolstered by the fresh 164th Infantry Regiment from the American Division, stood prepared. Bazookas, howitzers, and a lone M3 Stuart tank swiftly destroyed all 9 enemy vehicles. The incursion crumbled amid severe losses. The Corps assault unfolded overnight from October 24 to 25. Around 5,600 Japanese under Major General Yumio Nasu surged from the south, aiming to pierce defenses below Henderson Field. They clashed with the 1st Battalion, 7th Marines, led by Lieutenant Colonel Louis Chesty Puller, backed by 164th Infantry detachments. That night's clash etched itself into Marine legend. Enemy waves hammered relentlessly through the darkness. Pinpoint enemy advances got plugged by swift ripostes. Gunners blasted non-stop until their pieces jammed, then seized carbines to keep battling. The 11th Marines' barrages dropped perilously near friendly lines, mere paces from foxholes. Off the coast, the battleship USS Washington waited in reserve to unleash sea barrages on demand. In a pivotal instant, just one Marine battalion barred the Japanese from Henderson Field, yet they held firm. Sergeant John Basilone, hero of Bloody Ridge, proved vital once more to the stand. As rounds dwindled for his ma. In the machine gun sector, Basilone himself hauled ammunition across enemy-held territory to ensure his weapons kept firing. He fixed up broken machine guns right in the midst of the barrage. Once a gun emplacement fell to the attackers, he seized a .45 pistol and spearheaded a pushback that reclaimed the position. By daybreak on October 25th, the Japanese push had crumbled. General Nasu perished, struck down by machine gun bursts in one of the nocturnal assaults. Over 2,000 Japanese troops lost their lives in the bid to pierce the defenses. U.S. losses amounted to a few hundred dead and injured, heavy yet manageable. That same month of October 1942 witnessed crucial sea clashes that tipped the scales decisively near Guadalcanal. The Guadalcanal naval clash, spanning 4 days from November 12th to 15th, featured some of the fiercest ship-to-ship battles ever recorded. During a chaotic clash under cover of darkness on November 13th, U.S. cruisers and destroyers tangled with a Japanese shelling group that boasted the battleships Hiei and Kirishima. Rear Admiral Daniel Callahan and Rear Admiral Norman Scott, the sole American flag rank officers to fall in World War II surface battles, perished in the fray. The U.S. side sacrificed 2 light cruisers and 4 destroyers, with 3 additional destroyers taking hits. The Japanese, meanwhile, saw the battleship Hiei crippled in the evening skirmish and finished off by planes the next day. Crucially, though, the shelling objective fell apart. Henderson Field stayed in action. From the evening of November 14th into the 15th, the battleship Kirishima made a fresh run at bombarding the field, but ran into the USS Washington and USS South Dakota. Through a stunning showcase of U.S. radar-guided firepower, the Washington slammed 9 16-inch rounds into Kirishima at distances where Japanese spotters could hardly make out the foe. Kirishima went under, claiming many lives. Even more pivotal, U.S. planes and warships obliterated a Japanese transport fleet trying to deploy the 38th Division along with its gear. Out of 11 troop carriers, just 4 made it to Guadalcanal, only to get wrecked by airstrikes and shore guns before offloading completely. Losses from the convoy topped 5,000 Japanese personnel. This stood as the final major effort to bolster Guadalcanal with a well-armed infantry division. For the Japanese already dug in on the island, November signaled the onset of doom. They had anticipated fresh troops and supplies. What came instead was word of naval routes, sunk supply runs, and no further aid on the horizon. Food allotments shrank once more. Troops already on the brink of famine faced orders to endure with meager portions. Vital medical stocks, already scarce, vanished entirely. The ill and injured overflowed crude aid stations, where medics could only stand by as patients succumbed. Diaries seized from Japanese soldiers during these weeks revealed a grim unraveling. Notes chronicled rice shares cut to a single handful daily. Illness rampant across the ranks. Corpses cremated only when the men mustered the energy. The dawning truth that resupply had ended. Fighters reduced to foraging leaves and tree rind. Fatalities from toxic foliage. Warriors wasting away into gaunt, frantic husks. Come December, the endgame arrived. Japanese headquarters at Rabaul opted to pull out from Guadalcanal. Publicly, they dodged any talk of loss, but in secret, leaders grasped that pressing on would annihilate the 17th Army. Roughly 11,000 Japanese fighters lingered on the island, a sharp drop from the high of 36,000. Among those 11,000, maybe 7,000 could still march. The others suffered illness, injuries, or such profound hunger that movement was a crawl. The pullout, dubbed Operation K, emerged as one of Japan's standout feats throughout the war. Mimicking the Tokyo Express with destroyer shuttles, their navy spirited away 10,152 troops across 3 nights in early February 1943. An impressive feat amid harsh odds, yet it masked the sheer scale of the setback. Japanese numbers on Guadalcanal had crested at about 36,000 troops. From that force, between 25,000 and 30,000 perished, around 14,800 in battle and 10,000 to 15,000 to sickness and hunger. U.S. tolls were grim but bearable. Marine and Army outfits engaged on Guadalcanal suffered about 600 combat deaths, 4,200 injuries, and thousands more sidelined briefly by jungle fevers. Yet U.S. factories and recruits could offset such hits. Fresh units were drilling non-stop. Vessels and planes rolled off assembly lines quicker than sinkings or wrecks. Control of the war's momentum had flipped for good. Guadalcanal's toll on Japanese strategic mindset defies easy measure. It marked their initial true loss in prolonged land fighting. All attacks had faltered. Every go at classic Japanese battle tactics yielded ruinous death tolls. The realization that U.S. troops possessed not just superior resources, but also effective tactics, strong leadership, and the ability to withstand harsh environments completely overturned earlier expectations. Surviving Japanese commanders from Guadalcanal, who later penned recollections or spoke in post-war interviews, repeatedly highlighted key points. Primarily, they had vastly misjudged the combat prowess of American soldiers. Additionally, the gap in weaponry and provisions exceeded what their reconnaissance reports had indicated. Moreover, Japan's supply chains proved woefully insufficient for prolonged engagements versus a foe dominating the oceans and skies. Finally, reliance on morale and battlefield expertise couldn't overcome the inherent deficits in armament and materiel. Reflections from Japanese participants after the war showed a uniform evaluation. They had viewed themselves as unmatched fighters, drilling more rigorously, embracing mortality without hesitation, and excelling in nocturnal battles and hand-to-hand clashes. Yet Guadalcanal taught them that conflicts hinge on organized frameworks. The Americans relied on comprehensive setups for logistics, healthcare, cannon assistance, and aerial integration. All these mechanisms operated smoothly. In contrast, Japanese arrangements collapsed due to their flawed foundations from the outset. Veterans of the Guadalcanal effort who lived through it and later gave testimonies offered in-depth narratives that challenged the government's post-war rationales for the loss. They conceded that U.S. troops performed exceptionally in darkness while holding fortified spots. They noted how Americans persisted through malaria, dysentery, and grueling circumstances, sustaining their fighting capacity thanks to robust resupply efforts. They conceded the devastating, synchronized, and pinpoint accuracy of American barrages. One U.S. battalion delivered greater destructive potential than a full Japanese regiment. Technological edges in American capabilities played a crucial role. On Guadalcanal, Japanese units relied on Arisaka rifles, bolt-action designs needing hand-operated reloading after each discharge. U.S. Marines started with M19903 Springfield rifles, likewise bolt-action, but increasingly augmented by the semi-automatic M1 Garand as supplies arrived. The Garand's 8-round magazine and rapid-fire mechanism offered clear benefits during exchanges. The contrast grew even more pronounced with automatic weapons. The U.S. M19-17A1 Browning, equipped with water cooling, could maintain continuous bursts, provided it had coolant and rounds. Japanese models, mainly the Type 96 and Type 99, were more mobile and compact, but couldn't sustain prolonged shooting. In fixed defenses, this gap proved critical. Perhaps the most vital advantage lay in field guns. The 11th Marines employed M1A1 pack howitzers, disassemblable for traversal across dense foliage. These 75mm pieces delivered quick, precise barrages. Spotters embedded with ground forces could request strikes and get impacts in mere minutes. Japanese guns on Guadalcanal remained scarce, cumbersome in the undergrowth, and perpetually low on shells. Ship-based barrages introduced an unmatched layer. Destroyers and cruisers at sea could rain shells on enemy strongholds or furnish on-call aid to Marine advances ashore. Wireless links from land spotters to vessels enabled exact hits. aerial dominance intensified over time during the operation. The Cactus Air Force, based at Henderson Field amid dire odds, slowly secured control of the skies above Guadalcanal. Pilots from Marine and Army aviation units, piloting F-4F Wildcats, P-39 Airacobras, and P-40 Warhawks, thwarted Japanese bombing runs. SBD Dauntless divers targeted enemy sites, resupply vessels, and troop clusters. Japanese aviators out of Rabaul operated at the edge of their endurance, leaving scant loiter time. The climactic U.S. land push in January 1943 illustrated the total reversal of fortunes. Major General Alexander Vandegrift's 14th Corps, incorporating Marine and Army elements, executed unified assaults that methodically dismantled surviving Japanese holdouts. The drive enjoyed massive backing from cannons, planes, and sea guns. Though Japanese defenders fought tenaciously, they suffered from famine, illness, and scant munitions. By February 9, 1943, U.S. scouts found the Japanese had withdrawn. General Vandegrift relayed his notable dispatch to Admiral Halsey. Tokyo Express no longer has terminus on Guadalcanal. The battle concluded. 6 months of combat yielded America's initial significant land triumph over Japan. Of greater consequence, it set precedents and exposed realities that would define the ensuing Pacific conflict. The insights drawn by Japanese survivors from Guadalcanal proved ruinous to their pre-war strategic beliefs. The legend of innate Japanese martial preeminence lay in ruins. Individual bravery and battlefield expertise proved insufficient when pitted against entrenched structural weaknesses. The nighttime assaults and hand-to-hand fighting that had defined Japanese triumphs in the Chinese theater fell short against U.S. fortified lines. Provisions and transport issues weren't mere afterthoughts, but essential pillars for prolonged engagements. Dominance in the skies and on the seas ultimately shaped ground results. The harsh realities of hunger and bloodshed on Guadalcanal ought to have sparked a profound overhaul in Japanese strategic doctrine. Certain commanders grasped the significance. Colonel Masanobu Tsuji, a headquarters planner who toured Guadalcanal amid the fighting, later penned that Japan must thoroughly reevaluate its approach. He noted how the U.S. waged a contest of factories where output levels decided victory. Japan stood no chance in such a manufacturing showdown against America's vast output. Yet, the entrenched Japanese martial heritage, rooted in centuries of customs and fresh conquests, resisted any deep-seated overhaul. The formal account of Guadalcanal pinned the shortfall on poor resupply, sea losses, and the surprising resilience of U.S. fortifications. It sidestepped the inherent defects in Japanese combat principles. It overlooked how the very framework of conflict that had propelled Japan past China now rang hollow against a contemporary industrial foe. Those Japanese troops who endured Guadalcanal and either fell into captivity later or outlasted the conflict turned into bearers of an unforeseen shift. They had stepped into the fray as assured fighters from an unassailable realm. They emerged as famished, illness-plagued remnants of a devastating rout. Numerous ones recounted Guadalcanal as the instant they truly grasped Japan's impending downfall. After the war, accounts from Japanese survivors captured this mental pivot. They admitted uncovering realities that superiors had concealed. The U.S. wasn't feeble, but crushingly superior, not only in armaments, but in structure, supply chains, command, and the capacity to maintain ongoing battles. Japanese units battled with valor and prowess. It made no difference. U.S. units engaged through frameworks and assets. Japanese units simply couldn't compete. From the American viewpoint, Guadalcanal highlighted contrasting insights. For the Marines and infantrymen who battled there, the effort showed that U.S. personnel could hold their own against Japanese fighters in the savagery of tropical warfare. The legend of Japanese supremacy shattered. U.S. fortification strategies succeeded. Integration of infantry, artillery, and support proved potent. Rank-and-file Americans with adequate preparation and gear demonstrated clear superiority over Japanese opponents. Still, Americans gained a deep appreciation for Japanese troops as resilient, resolute, adept foes who preferred death to capitulation. The resolve of Japanese units to press forward amid impossible circumstances, to withstand famine instead of yielding, to perish rather than withdraw, left a lasting mark. The disparity in how each side handled captives in submission revealed core societal divides. U.S. personnel attempted to promote Japanese capitulation, distributing flyers, airing broadcasts, and providing treatment and rations to those taken. Such initiatives yielded scant results. Out of roughly 36,000 Japanese personnel deployed to Guadalcanal, under 1,000 were seized alive, and most of them were debilitated by illness or injury to the point of helplessness. The broader ramifications of Guadalcanal reached well past the atoll. Japan's inability to reclaim Henderson Field and its ultimate withdrawal revealed vulnerabilities in the Japanese outer defenses. Allied plans evolved from holding actions to aggressive pushes. The manufacturing and resource edges America held could convert into battlefield success through methodical use. For Japan, Guadalcanal signaled the onset of decline. The irreplaceable toll in seasoned personnel, aviators, and vessels couldn't keep pace with America's rapid buildup of fresh capabilities. The choice to pull out, however understated, conceded that Japan couldn't endure a war of attrition versus American factory power. Survivors from Guadalcanal, whether American or Japanese, bore their ordeals lifelong. U.S. Marines and troops who made it through served as core trainers for emerging formations, imparting tough-earned wisdom on tropical tactics, fortification methods, and joint operations. The initial Marine Division, withdrawn from Guadalcanal in December 1942, needed extended recovery and refitting before re-entering the fight. Japanese evacuees confronted a bleaker path ahead. Those removed in Operation K scattered to various Pacific outfits, hauling the emotional weight of loss and the realization that U.S. strength far outstripped pre-war hype. Many met their end in subsequent following the ensuing conflicts. Japan's military stance kept weakening further. The island of Guadalcanal carried the marks of 6 months of fierce fighting for years to come. Damaged planes, ruined machinery, discarded gear, and unexploded munitions scattered across the forests and shorelines. Henderson Field, which grew and was upgraded amid and beyond the battle, functioned as a key Allied hub for later efforts in the Solomons. Among scholars of warfare and planners, Guadalcanal offered vital examples in landing assaults, forest combat, supply management, aerial-terrestrial teamwork, and blending sea forces with ground efforts. The fight highlighted that contemporary battles demanded more than courageous troops and clever maneuvers. They called for manufacturing strength, reliable supply chains, tech edges, and the capacity to keep campaigns going over long stretches. The toll in lives at Guadalcanal was immense for everyone involved. Over 700 U.S. and Japanese personnel perished in the sea clashes near the island. Ashore, U.S. losses topped 7,000 dead, injured, or unaccounted for. Japanese casualties surpassed 30,000 from every source. Countless others from both armies endured illnesses and hardships that lingered throughout their days. Yet, from a tactical viewpoint, the pivotal value made the horrific price worthwhile. Guadalcanal marked the pivot where Allied troops moved from holding back to pushing ahead in the Pacific. It showed Japan could be beaten in direct land fights. It set the mold for dominance in the air and on water that defined the war's later phases. The tale of Japanese units facing U.S. forest tactics on Guadalcanal boils down to a clash of two deeply contrasting views on contemporary combat. One approach trusted the dominance of fighter ethos, where bravery triumphed over gear shortages and maneuvers yielded wins despite limited supplies. The opposing view stressed the organized use of factory output, supply networks, and heavy guns as boosters of strength, with unified force teamwork as the path to triumph. Guadalcanal's wilderness turned into the testing ground where these rival ideas collided. The result, after half a year of savage struggle leading to its unavoidable end, proved that focused bombardment aid and supply systems, paired with solid strategies and resolute fighters, generated a type of armed might that Japanese units just couldn't rival. To the Japanese fighters who made it through Guadalcanal and shared their accounts later, the operation stood as the instant when truth crushed fantasy. They realized their preparation rested on misguided beliefs. Their methods suited another style of conflict. Their supply setup fell short right away, and their country was locked in a struggle it couldn't triumph over by arms alone. The U.S. combatants at Guadalcanal gained separate yet vital insights. They found they could equal Japanese troops in the savagery of battle. They confirmed that U.S. production muscle could turn into battlefield success. They crafted approaches and principles for woodland fighting that aided them in coming operations. And they broke the legend of Japanese unbeatable status, swapping it for a grounded view of a resilient, steadfast, but ultimately conquerable foe. On Guadalcanal, Japanese forces dreaded not so much the American troops as lone warriors, impressive as they were, but the methodical, crushing, unending deployment of guns and gear that U.S. units unleashed in each clash. This dread stemmed not from dread of dying, which Japanese training had prepared them to embrace, but from grasping that valor and selflessness meant nothing against a rival whose resources never dwindled, whose hurt got treatment, whose cannons kept pounding, whose planes ruled the heavens, and whose factories could refill ranks quicker than fights could deplete them. The change sparked by Japanese units' initial brush with U.S. woodland combat on Guadalcanal signaled a core turn in the Pacific conflict. After that, Japanese troops stayed on the back foot, waging a doomed fight versus a foe whose gear superiority widened month by month. Guadalcanal's woodland battles formed the model for upcoming drives, showing that U.S. forces could battle and prevail in the harshest landscapes versus a resolute adversary. As long as they secured solid supplies, strong teamwork, and superior armament,